And as usual, in the 2 hour show, we have to pack a lot into what we're talking about. And I'll be fair and honest. Simply, we could talk probably most of the day on Top Story, but the equivalent of Elvis Presley to rock and roll is in talk radio is Rush Limbaugh, and we certainly are not going to be preempting him. That will not happen. But in the meantime, I hope that I can squeeze as much as I can in to give you somewhat of a flavor of the day of what's going on locally, also nationally, and around the world. And just a few things that I've jotted down this morning that I know we're going to talk about early on. Steve Billington will be joining us at about 8:30. He's going to stick around a little longer today into the following hour for a few minutes to talk a little bit about the close of session, legislative session in Boise, which will not necessarily happen coming up on Friday. That's the actual deadline day, but it may be pushed beyond that according to what I'm seeing this morning on the Associated Press wire. Also coming up, there is a story, and it's been making some traction over the last few weeks, about a civics test being given to students in Idaho in order for them to graduate high school. It seems simple enough to me that you should know the name of the governor. You might know when the Constitution was put together. You might know the names of your two U.S. senators. And considering it's a smaller state population-wise, perhaps even your two House members. So we'll touch on that. Of course, some educators are opposed because they don't like the idea of teaching people about how their government runs. It makes it more difficult for their government to control them in the long run, I suppose. And finally, I had a conversation yesterday on air because as we were just getting on the air, Ted Cruz was giving a speech. For those of you who don't know, he is a U.S. Senator from Texas, but he was born in Calgary, Alberta. His father was working in the oil business there. Both his parents, I guess, were working in the oil business at the time. His father at the time was a Cuban national who had emigrated to the United States but did not become a U.S. citizen until 2005. Mr. Cruz's mother, though, is a U.S. citizen, born and raised in Delaware, and then later moved to Canada with her husband, where their son was born and where they lived until he was about 3.5 years old before moving back to Texas. So the question has been, as he was announcing yesterday, and he gave a great fiery speech. I got to watch all of it in full last night. It was on the website Real Clear Politics. So I queued up the video, watched the entire 32-minute presentation, and I've got to admit, the man, he is certainly, and you may have heard this too on Rush Limbaugh's program yesterday, media was marveling about the fact that he didn't have any ums or ahs, and he didn't need a teleprompter. He walked around the stage for half an hour speaking just off the top of his head and just got rapturous applause from many people who were in the audience. But is Ted Cruz eligible to be president of the United States because he was born in Canada? I have been saying no. Some of our callers agree with me. It comes down to the definition of natural-born citizen. 10 minutes after 8 o'clock, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. 41 at our studios and some light rain outside. The rain will be clearing off sometime, probably overnight. And then some clouds tomorrow. We're going to have a very gradual warm-up back into the mid-70s by this weekend with plenty of sunshine, just in case you were wondering about that. Back to Ted Cruz. I saw a video, in fact, on the website of the Wall Street Journal this morning that said this definition of natural-born citizen is a very difficult one to nail down. Does it mean someone born in the United States? The obvious reason that this was placed into the Constitution, they didn't want some foreign prince or duke coming here, running for president, and then claiming that this was part of his family's gift, and then causing perhaps a war where we would be invaded by someone from Europe who had a monarch who thought, well, wait a minute, that belongs to me now. And those things have happened throughout history. King Edward III, I believe it was, of England, known as Longshanks. The movie is a little bit, the movie Braveheart is a little bit what you'd call Hollywood more than history. But the idea is the same. He invaded Scotland because some distant relative, he said, had a claim to the land, and then therefore that made it his. And that's how it worked for, a couple of millennia in Europe. Well, we didn't want that in the United States. But according to this video I watched this morning at the Wall Street Journal website, there have been many court cases which have tried to define what natural-born citizen is. And according to what the man was saying in this Wall Street Journal video, if you have one parent born in the United States who is a U.S. citizen and you are born on foreign soil, Courts. It's not in the Constitution because it's not defined in the Constitution beyond just that one phrase. But courts have said if you have a parent born in the United States and you're born out of the country, then you are a natural-born citizen. Now, that would mean he would be eligible. However, it's not done there. Someone could decide to challenge if he was elected, and this is not going to happen before an election, but if he was elected in November of 2016, then someone would go to the Supreme Court and they would challenge the election saying he is not a natural-born citizen, and they would try to put together an argument that would strike down the previous court cases. All of this would have to happen, though, between November Election Day and January 20th Inauguration Day. And then Mr. Cruz would have to step aside if the Supreme Court ruled against him. And then the vice presidential candidate, who would likely have been someone born in this country, would then become president. Do you understand that? Well, that's how that works. The other part of this is no citizen could walk off the street. So let's say John Q. Public here in Twin Falls, Idaho, wanted to challenge Mr. Cruz's election. You could not do it. You would not have standing. I listened to some legal experts on this matter yesterday, and they were saying it would have to be one of the other candidates. That would likely be whoever the Democrat will be coming up next year. That could be Hillary Clinton, it could be Elizabeth Warren or Martin O'Malley. That's where the challenge would have to come from. But it would not make that individual, the Democrat nominee, president. Again, it would fall on the shoulders of the vice presidential nominee of the Republican Party. So the Democrats really wouldn't get anything out of it other than just getting the number 2 guy on the ticket. And they would still lose. And then I saw this from Cato. Cato Institute in Washington is likely the largest libertarian think tank in the world, and it's a very constitutionalist body. And a writer there by the name of Ilya Shapiro says, yes, Ted Cruz is eligible to be president. Take a listen to this for a moment. He says, I looked at the whole natural-born citizen requirement a couple of years ago and concluded that Cruz's eligibility for the presidency is an easy legal call. Here's the heart of the matter. And then what he has done is he's put a couple of paragraphs in here. So the one remaining question is whether Ted Cruz was a citizen at birth. That's an easy one. The Nationality Act of 1940. Now, this is an actual law in this country. The Nationality Act of 1940 outlines which children become, quote, nationals and citizens of the United States at birth, unquote. In addition to those who were born in the United States or born outside the country to parents who were born citizens, citizenship goes to babies born to one American parent who has spent a certain number of years here. So this was a matter of Congress trying to codify this. And the writer says that single-parent requirement has been amended several times, but under the law in effect between 1952 and 1986, Cruz was born in 1970. Someone must have been a citizen parent or have had a citizen parent who resided in the United States for at least 10 years, including 5 after the age of 14, in order to be considered, it says, a natural-born citizen. Cruz's mother, Eleanor Dara, was born in Delaware, lived most of her life in the United States, and gave birth to little Raphael Edward Cruz in her 30s. So she qualified under law, and that means that Ted Cruz qualifies under the law of the time. And even though the law changed in 1986, we don't have ex post facto laws. You cannot go back and say, well, the new law says he can't do it. Because he was born under the old law when it was in effect, then Ted Cruz apparently is eligible. We have a caller with us, 815. You're on the air on Top Story with Bill Colley.
No, Bill, I know this is going to have problems, and that's guaranteed. But hypocrisy is going to come out because everything that came out of Obama. And they said it didn't matter. Because even if he was born in Kenya, he was born to a U.S. citizen. So they're gonna step right in it, and it's going to be ugly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess the argument will be Mr. Obama will have already done his 8 years as president, so therefore that precedent is out of the way. And I understand where you're coming from. I happen to see in that very same Wall Street Journal video today the statements made by Donald Trump. You may remember Donald Trump was chief among the birthers, and because he had a lot of money, he could really push this issue. Trump was saying he is not a U.S. citizen because he was not born in the United States. Aha, see, there you go. That argument, and that argument was made strongly by people in the Republican Party. Trump is a Republican whether the party wants him or not. He was making that argument that if you are not born in the United States, then you cannot be a candidate. But Trump wasn't the law, and he wasn't the courts. So we have to consider all of that. Here's another part of all of this. I think that this issue, because of the precedent already with Mr. Obama, it will be raised for a while, but I think it will be buried. Now, I don't see Ted Cruz winning the Republican nomination for president to begin with. I think that he is going to be so dogged by media and so many of his other opponents, he will have a difficult time sewing up a nomination. It's not impossible, because he is somewhat of a plain speaker. I happen to see, some of you may have caught Rand Paul's appearance last night with Megyn Kelly on Fox television, Fox News. Rand Paul was saying, I got to just make clear, the Fox television is different. That's where they show that program 24, and they used to show that program Married with Children, right, and The Simpsons and all of that. And then there's Fox News. That's a different entity. Same corporate entity, but different channels. So on Fox News last night, Megyn Kelly was speaking with Rand Paul about this, and Rand Paul said that Ted Cruz is probably the one person in the U.S. Senate who is closest to me politically, philosophically. But Paul already has staked out that libertarian wing, so he has that. And the social conservatives, you're going to have Rick Santorum back, you're going to have Mike Huckabee back, Scott Walker is a social conservative, and then you've got people like Rick Perry who are, he's a conservative and then he's strong on he's strong on national defense, and he is also very pro-business. And then you've got Mr. Bush, Jeb Bush, who is basically just the tool of Wall Street. So the party is already divided up in that sense, and there will be some other names that get jumping in there, which means that Ted Cruz's support, and he gets a little bit of a bounce because of his speech yesterday, but his support will wane after several other people jump in. So it may all become just an academic exercise to have this discussion, but it's not a bad discussion to have, because we are likely to see it coming up time and again in the future, and maybe even more so than we saw in any past election. Now, keep in mind, when Donald Trump said you have to be born in the United States, if you take that argument, does that also mean American Samoa? Does that also mean the U.S. Virgin Islands? Does that also mean Puerto Rico? Does that also mean the Panama Canal Zone? That's where John McCain was born, while his father was serving in the Navy. And I would say yes, it includes all of those territories, too, of the United States. Barry Goldwater had to face this very same complaint. In 1964, when he was running for president, he was challenged because people said, well, he was not born in the United States, because at the time, Arizona had not been a state. It didn't become a state until 1912. So for that reason, they said he wasn't eligible. But people stood back and said, well, you know, he was born in what became Arizona. So they let it through. But we are in a gray area here, definitely. And if Cruz does win the election, and it is a contentious election, yes, then you could expect O'Malley or Clinton or Warren or whatever other Democrat midget will challenge the whole situation. More coming up in just a few minutes. Speaking of all these constitutional issues, civics education being recommended in Idaho. Oh, little Glenn Miller early in the morning. I got to tell you, I really enjoy that. Long before my time, you know, he was killed about 18 years before I was born. And so all I know is some of the old family members who used to listen to this. And at the time when you're a little kid, you go, oh, what kind of crap is that? And then as you grow older, you appreciate it. It's like iced tea. I had iced tea with my lunch at a restaurant Saturday. They're not an advertiser, so I shouldn't do a plug, but I was in Bellevue and I stopped at a place called Mahoney's to get some lunch. And I had a big iced tea with my lunch. You would not have caught me drinking iced tea when I was a little boy. I mean, I just thought the stuff was rancid. Today, I can't get enough of it. It's the same way with certain old music when I happen to hear it. Quickly, I wanted to mention my good friends at Western States Bus Services this morning. Still hiring part-time bus drivers right now. Split shifts 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. Pay is $10.75 per hour. You can apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services. It's an equal opportunity employer. Great way for a second income in some families. Also, tomorrow morning, going to be talking weight loss. I hope you can take a few minutes and join us too as well. We're going to be talking weight loss tomorrow morning. Got some folks coming by, some of the medical professionals from my good friends at Tripp Family Medicine. You may know exactly where they are if you stop quite a bit at the main post office on Fillmore Street. The office is directly across the street from the main post office. And we're going to be talking about some of the new methods that help people lose weight. And some of these are more effective and safer than anything you've seen in the past. And if you really have an issue and you're really one of those people who has a desire to take off those pounds, I think you're going to want to tune in. Also, give us a telephone call if you get an opportunity. Give us a telephone call during the course of the program. We do this every Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, because life's too short not to feel good. I have another caller joining me. I'm going to call at 8:25. It's 42 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And you're up next. You're on the air.
Bill, I just want to have food thought on your last discussion. There is a lot of candidates out there, and there's a candidate for every little segment. But I want everybody to study and look at everything. And who out there has always voted on the side of the Constitution.
Agreed. And I thank you again for following up. I have a post. If you go to our website, newsradio1310.com, I put up a post last night where I talked a little bit about how, as a Republican, I get sometimes exasperated. And I think that a great many of us do. And I have a huge fondness for the Constitution Party. But the Constitution Party will not win any elections on the national level probably in my lifetime. So I have to look at the Republicans and find out who among them, when I'm voting for a president or a governor, and you really, on the other than the local level, you're not going to see a lot of these other parties make any inroads for a long time. So when I look at this, I have to say, all right, who is going to match up best to me? I took a poll one time. Gosh, this has to be back around the election of 2004. You had these online polls where they asked you questions about what you believed about certain issues. And then you filled out about 25 questions, and then at the end it tried to match you up with candidates who most likely agreed with you. Do you know that my best match was just 51%? That was Pat Buchanan. 51%, my best match. Number 2, Dick Cheney at 49%. Heck, even Hillary Clinton agreed with me on 32% of the issues. That's not enough for me to make a decision on voting for a Democrat. It's not going to happen. But the fact of the matter is, we have to find people out there. We may not agree with them 100%. You know, the only way to get a candidate that you agree with completely is to run on your own. And most people just simply don't bother to do that. 8:27. Steve Millington is going to be joining us in just a few minutes from the Twin Falls Republican Party. Got a little Idaho news, and I actually, this story is one that I saw a couple of weeks ago, and I had hoped to talk about it considerably more often, and finally I'm getting a chance to at least add a couple of minutes of thought to it this morning. Associated Press says that name one of 2 U.S. senators from the state of Idaho. That's the opening lead in this story. That's just one question from a test that Idaho students may soon need to pass to graduate from high school. The House Education Committee unanimously voted Monday to require students to pass a test with basic questions on U.S. government in order to get their diplomas. Amen. I'm not trying to revive a poll tax, but if you're too dang dumb, you shouldn't go out and vote. And what we should do is we should also have you pass one of these tests in order that you are eligible to vote. That's at least my personal opinion on all of this. Republican Senator Jim Patrick from Twin Falls says students must correctly answer 60 of 100 questions, which come from the federal government's citizenship tests for immigrants. But Idaho's Education Association president, Penny Sear, says testing like this stifles creativity. It takes away time from other subjects. In other words, indoctrinating them into the liberal mindset, I guess. But I love the idea. I don't know why it's so difficult. When I was a little boy, my mother bought me a little map of the United States, and you could take the pieces out, you'd empty them all out on the floor, and then you had to match them all back into the map. I had a lot of fun with that puzzle. But I also can look at a map of a state and know exactly what that state is today. Oh, and there were little flags, and each state had a flag, and the capital city was also located there. And what you could do is you could take the state flag and put that flag into the capital city on the map, too. And then we had a teacher in the 8th grade, and we had to memorize the preamble of the Constitution, along with a Bill of Rights. But we also had, at the time when we took our test at the end of the year, he put all of the amendments to the Constitution on one side and numbers on the other, and we had to match those up, and we had to know all of those states. This was in the 8th grade. Now, what was so dang difficult about that? I got it. And I'm not exactly a rocket scientist. Coming up on 8:30, Steve Millington will be joining us in just a couple of minutes from the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 43 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. Now, see, I think this kind of music's appropriate with Steve Millington in the studios with us because he represents a lot of old small town values. One of my favorite old TV shows.
Yes.
I sat when we wouldn't have school. If we had a school day or snow day, or if I was home with a cold or whatever, the reruns were always on in the morning, and I'd sit there and watch these over and over and over again. I can memorize. I could recite certain lines from the Andy Griffith Show. Not that I'm saying that that's anything that talent that you will put you ahead in life. Steve Millington.
It's just interesting stuff to remember.
Yeah, Steve Millington is in studio with us. He is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 44 right now, coming up on 8:35. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Steve, we were supposed to say end of session Friday and for the state legislature, but it doesn't look like it.
Ain't gonna happen. I think what they're looking at now is probably next Friday, April 3rd or April 4th. And that is dependent upon several big major items being completed. And there's still a lot of, I think we mentioned last week that when you get right down close to the end here, that's when all of the crazy stuff surfaces and everybody has their pet little thing that they want to jam through. And so they wait until the last minute. And one of the benefits of waiting till the last minute is we're out of time. And so we can't give it a proper hearing and a proper debate. And so everybody just says, this is probably going to be okay. And so they vote yes. Or else they're going to say, oh, man, this thing is terrible. And they all vote no. So we're down to that point in time when some of these unusual bills come out of the legislature.
And the teacher bill, which looked for a couple of days like it wasn't going to go anywhere, quickly moved through the House yesterday.
I think the perception that this is not going to go anywhere, it's dead on arrival, was kind of a lot of rhetorical play. And they were really scrambling behind the scenes. And of course, the media and so forth want to report on something, so they throw out little tidbits here and there for the media to grab a hold of. And in the meantime, behind the scenes, behind closed doors, they were working on some plans. Now, this career ladder plan that it's commonly referred to is not all bad. We're going to spend an awful lot of money on this plan. There was a review that was posted on one of the Boise television station's websites that said at the end of 5 years, the implementation of this career plan, if it follows through to its conclusion, will cost an additional $130 million per year to keep it in place. Now that's incremental. We get, I think the number for next year is about $32 or $33 million in the first step, and then we go up in about $30 million per year increments until we hit the current top, but that's only a 5-year plan. That will go up, obviously, over the next 5-year period. But there was also some additional little insights that show up. Now, the starting salary for teachers in Idaho is about $31,700. Next year, that's going to take them to $32,700, so that's a full $1,000. Well, there are 2,080 hours in a work year, 52 weeks times 40 hours. Well, you take $32,700 and divide it by 2,080. It's just not quite $16 an hour. Now, that's not an awful lot of money. Now, keep in mind that teachers basically are required in the classroom 182 or 3 days a year, plus they have preparation time before school starts in the fall and completion time in the early summer. So they probably work 200 days a year. Pretty easy. So, on a per hour basis, they're probably pushing closer to 18 or 19. But
and my sister always likes to tell me it's not an 8-hour day.
It's not.
It's much longer.
And I've got several family members involved in education, and they will tell you emphatically it's not an 8-hour day. You have got prep time before, you've got prep time during your day, you've got papers and grading and so forth in the evenings, And so the 8-hour a day thing is not a reasonable nor accurate comparison. But nevertheless, even at 32,700, that's not a very high starting wage, considering you've got a bachelor's degree from college and you passed the certification requirements. Not a lot of money. Now, at the end of 5 years, that number is going to raise to 37,000, and that's okay, fine. Well, there was a little sidebar on this stuff, and it said, "Oh, by the way, just in case you were interested, the average salary for teachers in the state of Wyoming was about 57,900. In Nevada, it was 57,800. I can't read this morning. In Utah, it was about 56,000. California, 70,000. Who wants to go to California? Washington State was 52,000. Everybody take a deep breath and hang on. The state of Idaho, average teacher pay, $50,950 a year. So even though our starting pay seems real low, on average, a $51,000 a year job is not too shabby.
Hold on to that thought. We have more coming up. Obviously, some discussion on the transportation issue.
A lot.
A lot of that coming up. 45 right now at our studios. It's 8:40. Steve Millington, our guest on Top Story. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX. Steve Millington is our guest in the studio. Steve is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. It's 8:43. It's 44 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Odd that, here we are just a few days away from a potential end of legislative session, and Steve's not actually pounding the table today. Not yet.
No, I think the ending of the legislative session is going to be more like April 3rd or 4th. Let's push it back a full week, shall we?
Sometime in April.
Yeah.
Well, you've been watching this thing develop, and the one area that I think has gotten the most comments from the public when we're talking about it is the whole notion of the transportation fund. And I think we're still looking at least a nickel per gallon tax increase on gasoline, right?
That's correct. And that varies depending on who you talk to. Some say we're going to be locked in at about 5 cents a gallon on gas, a little bit more than that on diesel fuel. And the reason that I don't have a firm number is because they haven't really put one out there yet. Additionally, some people are now saying we really need to raise the gas tax to 7 or 8 cents a gallon, and forget this 5 number. Let's bump it up to 7 or 8, and that a lot of people might agree to that kind of a number. So keep in mind, every 1 penny per gallon is the equivalent of $10 million a year in additional tax revenues. So 50 or 5 cents is equal to $50 million. 8 cents is closer to 80. But that's still a long ways from the 260 that the Department of Transportation keeps saying we need this much money. That's a long ways away. So they're looking at other things. How are we going to get this put together so that we've got a transportation funding program that gets us real close to that $260 million number? Well, that's not going to happen this year, so we can forget that part. But they would like to try to get it as close to $100 million as they possibly could swing it. Now, keep in mind that the education budget is going to go up 7.4% versus a year ago number. Now, the total state budget is only going up like just under 4%. And so we have a lion's share, well, more than all of the increase, plus some savings and some other reductions in other departments are going to end up going into the education budget. And we talked about this career ladder increase. That $130 million per year at the end of 5 years is a big number. And all of that's going to have to be going into specifically education. Now, there is one clause in all of this stuff that says, okay, if we run into a problem, we have stub our toe, and revenues do not increase like we expect, there is a 1-year escape window in this career ladder. For 1 year, the legislature can say, okay, we do not have the money to fund the stair steps on the education career ladder salaries. So they will just recess it for 1 year. But at the end of that year, we have to go back. Then we put the career plan, back into place, which means that things have got to work very well for a state, or we're going to see some tax increases.
You know, that the argument has been we need to retain these teachers because they will go somewhere else for more money. However, when I was moving here, you can go to the internet, you can pull up those cost of living calculators, and I was stunned by how much, this was a benefit for me coming to Idaho. So if you're already making on average $50,000 a year, a little over $50,000 a year in Idaho, you might make $7,000 or $8,000 more. But if you're living in Seattle, your cost of living is going to just wipe that out.
It's gone. And the same with I look at the Nevada numbers. They're about $5,000 or $7,000 a year more money than the Idaho numbers. But for the most part in Nevada, you're going to pay a whole lot more money for everything else that you do down there. So there's a trade-off. And you mentioned as you were exploring the opportunity to relocate to Idaho, you did a little bit of research. Yesterday, I saw an interesting report that said the best and worst states to retire. And I thought to myself, well, let me see how close I am to being right on the mark, or should I go somewhere else? And so I pulled it up and looked at it, and it was a shock. Number 1 was Wyoming. Number 2 was Colorado. Number 3 was Utah. Number 4, Idaho. Then we had Iowa. Then we had Virginia. Then we had Montana. And I looked at that and I said, would you look at that? 5 out of the 7 best places to retire are located right down through the middle of the Intermountain West.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, okay, let's not throw that completely off the cliff. And so I don't think people can get by on $32,700 a year. That's really too low. But if they'll stay with it given over time, and keep in mind these are average salaries, they're not the median or the mean, they're the average. So we take the total salaries and divide it by the total people, and that's our average number. So it's not representative of half are above the number and half are below the number. It's just the average. So if you can hang on for a few years, you get up into that 40, 45 range, and a lot of people will get additional education, maybe a master's degree. That's going to bump them on the step and ladder thing. Instead of just going up vertically, they can move over 1 grade and then continue to move. But keep in mind, we have got to have an awful lot of revenue increase in the state of Idaho to fund these additional increases just in education.
Our guest in studio, Steve Millington, is the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. 10 minutes from 9 o'clock, 44 at our studios. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. So if we raise teacher salaries, and we're not going to cover all of the transportation needs, but there's also a story at the Associated Press today that says they're looking at reducing property taxes because it would be good for business retention. Look, government is not going to spend less money. We're already being told we're going to spend more money for teachers. We still have to figure out a way to pay for roads, and we're not going to cover all of that. And then if we reduce property taxes, somewhere something's got to give. Something else has to be cut in government, and I have some suspicions that's not going to happen.
Well, and in Idaho, we need to take a real careful look at what constitutes the Idaho General Fund. And this does not include transportation spending, just the general fund. If we take K-12 plus higher education, universities, colleges, universities, that's approximately 63 to 64% of the total general fund goes into that one category. We'll just lump it generally and call it education. The next highest percentage is social services, health and welfare and all that kind of stuff, and they chew up about 20%. And then we have corrections, which includes the criminal justice systems, prisons, and so forth, and they chew up another like 12 or 15%. That leaves you about 6 to 7% of the total general fund to pay for all of the other costs of state government. That would be your administration costs and all of the, all that other stuff that comes in there. We don't have an awful lot of give and take in that budget. It's whittled down real tight. And so when we start seeing these efforts to help themselves to that pool of money, I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that ain't going to work. Now, let's go back to transportation for just a minute. So the gas tax is going to be a minimum of 5 and a maximum of, say, 8. It's going to be in that range somewhere. Then they want to talk about a little bit of an increase in our registration fees that we pay each year to register and license our vehicles. You can opt out for a 2-year registration, but you just pay double the cost. So it's really an annual fee that you pay, whether you pay it annually or whether you pay it biennial. The dollars is the same. And then they still want to siphon off a pretty healthy chunk from the general fund. And
which you've been opposed to.
Boy, I really am. I really just, and I'll take the heat. That's fine. Dump it on me. I'm okay with that. Now they're talking somewhere in the $12.5 to $15 million one time. However, it's not one time. They want to bake it in the cake so that this continues on each year right on down the road. And like I said last week, once you get that door open, you'll never get it closed again. They will just come after the general fund forever for the transportation. Now, I can't, they don't seem to get the picture up there that we got to increase the revenues somewhere to pay for these things. I think, I'm really going on a limb here. I think part of what causes that problem is that a lot of lobbying interests have what is known as pledge cards. And when I ran a year ago, I got 1 or 2 or more of those every day for about a month. You know, we would be more than glad to add your name to our list of candidates that we support, and all you have to do is sign this pledge card that you will never spit in the wind, or raise taxes, or do this, or do this, or do this, or whatever. The homeschooling has a pledge card. The charter schools has one. IACI had one, Idaho Freedom Foundation, and that's the one that says raise no taxes, period. And a lot of people have signed these pledge cards with, and I kind of like Wayne Hoffman at Idaho Freedom Foundation, but come on, people, you got to figure out how to pay the bills. One of their major things is their pledge card says no new tax increase, or no tax increases, not new taxes, no tax increases. And everybody just goes wild on that thing. So there's a lot of these people who have signed this card that when we start looking at raising transportation fees, gas taxes, diesel taxes, registration fees, that smacks right in the face of no tax increases. And so now they're running the risk of having some of these special interest groups come back and hit them in the back of the head saying, wait a minute, you pledged not to do this and you just did. So we're going to send out notices to everybody in your voting legislative district that you reneged. You voted to raise taxes. And so now they're caught in this horrible dilemma of, I know we have a problem here, but I said I would never do this, and I'll be up for election 1 year from now.
It's like George H.W. Bush, read my lips.
That's exactly right.
And it came back to bite him.
It haunted him. It really did, just haunted him right to the end. So I'm not a big fan of taking money from general fund to pay for transportation costs. And they're getting creative as all get out. They want to just get a little nibble here and get a little nibble here and put it into transportation. Now, one of the things you may remember the governor said in his State of the State address this year as well as a year ago, and that is we need to rebuild our rainy day fund. That's kind of the savings account, if you will. So now everybody has designs on that savings account, that rainy day fund money. So if the rainy day fund gets over a certain threshold, and I don't know what the numbers is, let's just use 10%, for example. Our annual general fund budget is about $3.3 or $3.4 billion. Not an awful lot by federal standards, but it's Idaho. So if we round up $330 or $340 million and put it in our rainy day fund, if we have a good year and we want to put more than that into the rainy day fund. There are people who say, no, you've got your rainy day fund covered. We want all of that money to go to transportation, not specifically education or health welfare or corrections or government administration, which are constitutional requirement, not constitutional. They're more legal than constitutional requirements from the general fund. Now we want to divert all that money to transportation rather than cut general fund revenues or whatever else we may come up with. And that it's just, yeah, and this property tax thing, that's so convoluted that it's hard to get your head around that thing. They just
and it came out of nowhere. Well, hey, we've got another 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, we're not going to go away. We just
Steve's
hang
gonna
on,
stick
folks.
around a few more minutes, and that means he can take some of your telephone calls too, following Fox News at 9 o'clock. He's been very gracious with his time this morning. He agreed to stay a few more minutes because we are so close to the deadline with the state legislature. It's 8:58. Steve Millington is in studio with us. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. I'm Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story. Steve Millington has agreed to stick around with us until about 20 after 9 this morning. Going to call it 46 right now at our studios. It's 7 minutes after 9 o'clock on Top Stories. You're listening to Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX, along online with newsradio1310.com, which means you can hear us anywhere around the world. If you have a question or comment for Steve while he's in the studio with us, feel free to give us a telephone call, 736-0300, 736-0300. Now, I did see one thing this morning. It looks as if we're going to go ahead with approval of the state salamander.
Kudos to the young. I think she's a junior high school girl she has been fighting for this now for a few years. I want to say 3 or 4 years to get this approved as the state reptile, I think it's called.
Yes.
And so she just wouldn't back off. She just hung right in there. So. Good for her.
She might have a career in politics.
She might.
I have mixed feelings about these things because people say we shouldn't be wasting legislative time on these issues. But on the other hand, they're a good learning tool for the younger people.
And on the other hand, sometimes it's nice to see that the legislature actually listens to the constituency.
Yes. We have a caller with us. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX, and what's on your mind?
Yeah. When they keep talking about the transportation department and the large money they want there, if they looked at cutting their cost a little bit, and instead of wasting everything like they do, I worked for the state for a while up at Shoshone in the transportation department, and there was so much waste up there, duplicating things. The people who was there wasn't qualified to do their jobs. They always had to job everything out, usually to people out of Wyoming or Utah.
Well, Steve, let me, if you want to, just jump in on that.
The caller makes an interesting point. One of the things that always seems to burst out whenever we talk about government spending is the wastes that creep in. Actually, I don't think it just creeps in. I think it just rushes in. And that's one of my concerns. I'm glad to hear that somebody who has actually been there and done that can look at the situation and say, there's a lot of waste. How do we go about resolving it or minimizing it or eliminating it so that we have a much more efficient transportation department in the state of Idaho? What kind of things can we get done?
I worked for the Postal Service for a year. Believe me, there are lots of places where things are wasted, and then everyone complains and says, we want more.
A couple of weeks ago, I think I mentioned to you that we had been traveling, and we come down past a construction crew. They were replacing some guardrail. And of course, they had their emergency vehicles on either side of the work zone with the flashers and the arrows saying get in the other lane, and one person sitting in each of those vehicles. Now, I think that's pretty mandatory when you're working on a freeway and everybody's going 80 miles an hour, and you better have some preparations in place. But you get up to the actual work site, and you look around and you say to yourself, why in the world is one guy digging and 4 guys watching?
Yes, we've all seen it.
And we all have. And every time we talk about increasing spending for transportation, those are the images that come back to our mind. I remember going past a deal and blum blum, and we say to ourselves, well, why can't they get their act together?
We have another caller with us, and I want to thank the previous caller.
Yes,
I'd like
good
to thank
point.
this caller for being patient. And you're on the air with Steve Millington on Top Story with Bill Colley.
Hello, Steve. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing okay, I hope.
Hey, I'm just curious. We got a lot of people in this state who are underemployed, who are on fixed incomes. And I fit in one of those categories. Where am I supposed to get this extra money? Buell last year they passed an $800,000 school bond. This year they passed a $2.5 million one. Now there's a rec district that they're trying to get passed. I can't put out a bond or a levy to increase my income. Where am I supposed to get that money?
And that's, I like you. I'm not basically what you'd call on a fixed income. It is variable, but I no longer report for work every morning at 8 o'clock and go home at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I think they say that I'm retired, and I've been tired and retired and tired again, but I don't have a regular full-time job, and so I empathize with our callers. Where am I going to get the extra money to take care of these obligations? And quite frankly, I don't have a quick, easy answer for you. I do know that these things, and I look at the gas tax thing. For a few years, the boss and I owned some convenience stores. And it was just really disconcerting to see the price of fuel go up by a few cents. And you know that you have to go out and change your marquee to reflect the increased cost of fuel. And the first thing, people come in and they start cussing that, what's the deal? Yesterday the price of gas was $1, now it's $1.05, and they dump it right on the first source. And our caller makes an interesting point. How do we get around this? And let's go back to this point that you made earlier in the show about they want to cut property taxes again. And I say to myself, holy smokes, how do we have to learn how to sell Idaho in a very positive and forward approach. We are the 4th best place in the United States of America for retired persons to live. Now, that's a double-edged sword. That means we could get a lot of people to come to Idaho during the retirement years, and they have a specific and unique needs. Their medical needs are going to be higher than Joe average. They will travel a little more. They will eat out, not lavishly, but they will go out to eat a couple of times a week. Many of them will find themselves on, quote, fixed incomes, unquote. But Idaho's a great place for retirement. Well, if you're bringing a company to town and you're going to have employees, they will not have to leave Idaho when they retire and go live to a, quote, more suitable or more beneficial state when they retire. So let's begin to sell the positive aspects of Idaho and bring in the categories and classes of workers and employers that can add to the overall benefit of the state of Idaho.
We have another caller with us.
Let's take them.
And you're on the air with Steve Millington and Bill Colley on Top Story, News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
Good morning.
Hi there.
Yeah, I just have a comment about one guy digging and the other 3 standing there watching.
Uh-oh.
If you've ever been with a shovel in your hand for very long, you know that it's very backbreaking work.
It is.
And usually it's a shovel team, and they're assisting heavy equipment, and there has to be digging here and there where the big backhoe can't just get everything really meticulously. And if you only had one guy there with a shovel, he wouldn't last more than a couple of weeks. He'd be on workman's comp or in the hospital with a
injury,
spine injury or something. So that's why.
And I'm disrespectful in that regard. I know better. Until last year, I did all my irrigating with a shovel. So I know about getting in the ditch and cleaning the mud and debris out of the ditch and keeping the water moving and make sure everything. And you only can do that for maybe 30 minutes at a time.
I had a friend. He for years he didn't buy a gutter cleaner. He did it all by
hand.
shovel.
Yeah. And it's hard work. And I don't mean to be disrespectful. And I know that they have a difficult thing. One of the things that comes to my mind right now, during the State of the State address, the governor indicated that the Transportation Department had made some efficiency changes and resulted in reducing headcount by, I want to say, 100 persons. And that's a pretty significant reduction of headcount if you maintain the same quality and quantity of output into the work area. So, and the other thing we have to keep in mind, and to the caller who said, okay, I'm kind of on a fixed income or a moderate income, how do I pay my bills? Inflation just keeps eating away at my spendable income. And the same thing happens to state government costs. Gasoline impacts them. Mm-hmm. Other costs impact them. Road materials, asphalts, oil, all that kind of stuff. It's not stagnant. It goes up. And so, they've got to cover those costs. Now, I noticed this past week, Burley, the city of Burley, just to our east here, had a big announcement about a company coming in there to build a factory. And shame on me, I can't remember what the name of the company was, but they're going to use as part of their feedstock, their raw material into their plant, straw, wheat straw, barley straw, some corn husks, and they're going to cook it and take the petroleum element out of those materials and turn it into, well, we would just call it styrofoam containers, only they're not styrofoam. They're a substitute using green materials. And when I looked at it, I thought to myself, well, it's only going to have, when they get up to full capacity, it's going to be about 100 jobs. But some of the tax benefits that they got by locating there required them to have a minimum number of jobs that exceeded the county average pay. And if I remember from the article, it was about $31,000 a year is the county average in Cassia County. So they've got to have a minimum of 20 jobs that pay more than $31,000 a year. And I thought, well, that's only $16 an hour, but that's not a bad wage. And if people have a little bit of ambition and a little bit of drive, they'll soon make that number 20 or 25.
And it beats working or living out of a grocery cart.
That's right.
Got about a minute left. I'm going to see if we can get
more callers. Oh man, come on.
No, that caller's no longer with us. Let's try our next line. You're on the air with Steve Millington on Top Story with Bill Colley.
Yeah, hey, I heard that guy just called in talking about how backbreaking the work was. We grew up here on the farms around here, and I used to spend an entire day digging corrugates when we had gravity feed irrigation, and I used to spend hours upon hours with shovels in my hand digging. Now, I never broke my back. Are we just not as tough as we used to be, or what? I don't want to sound like I'm being rude here, but,
No, I agree with you.
I think it's BS. I really do. I know what they do. I see them standing around. We can make excuses all day, and if that guy wants to call me names, I guess he can call back and do so.
We'll cut him off. But you're right. You can't see my hands, but already, and it's only the end of March, already I've got calluses starting to form across my hands because I've been out catching up. The weather's nice, so let's get a head start on things. And you're out working, and I'm not running a shovel, but I've got equipment. I don't have a big place. I've just got a small place. So a lot of it is manual hand labor. And already I've got calluses on my hands.
Remember the day when TV dishes first came out and they were huge?
Yeah.
Those big holes, 4 feet wide, it's 4 foot square, it's 4 feet deep. You're looking at the guy who used to dig those. And I didn't have a team. I just did it. Mixed the concrete and poured it in there after we got the post in and all of that. Well, look, you'll be back next week. We'll still be talking about state legislative affairs.
We might be able to say we're going to wrap it up this week, but do not sleep comfortably. The Idaho legislature is still in session. You cannot rest comfortably. Be on your guard.
All right. Thank you, Steve.
See you now.
KLIX, News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. There is a story that I happened to see this morning. Someone emailed it to me. I don't recall seeing it on the AP wire, maybe because it's politically incorrect Somebody from outside the state sent this to me and says, boy, there's a lot of news going on in Idaho lately. I'll get to it in just a minute. It involves a student who may be a serial rapist, or at least allegedly, and he was allowed to stay at an Idaho campus, at least for a while. Details on that just minutes away. First, I wanted to mention our friends at Western States Bus Services, who are still looking to hire, and they train, school bus drivers. That would be a split shift, 5 days per week, summers off, and scheduled no school days. The pay is $10.75 per hour. Apply today by contacting 733-8003. Western States Bus Services is an equal opportunity employer. So maybe I just missed this story. That's all I can think of. Maybe somebody out there can share with me the details on this if you've already heard about it. But something called Front Page Magazine picked this up. Saudi tries to rape Idaho student, gets released, tries it again. Daniel Greenfield, the author. It is hard to say who comes off worst in this story. Sultan, and his last name I guess is pronounced Bamolem, a Saudi student who kept trying to assault women and possibly men on campus, or the university and cops who let him do it again. Now, apparently a woman woke up in a room. She was in Pocatello, at a university at Pocatello. Woke up in her room and found this man standing there touching her back. And then he claimed he happened to be a boyfriend of her roommate. But then she said she started getting used to seeing, because it's the middle of the night, her eyes started adjusting. She noticed he wasn't wearing any pants. And he may have been manipulating himself. Well, they got him out of the room, and according to the student, this is what happened. He apparently got let back on campus. He was let go, and then he really went into overdrive, according to the writer. On March 10, police say they got a report of him following a student into a women's restroom. On March 11, they responded to Nichols Hall just before 1 a.m., where they said he had been getting access by telling a student he lived there and had forgotten his key card. At that point, ISU banned him from campus, but officers said they found him later that night on the 7th floor of Turner Hall. On March 13, police said he attempted to camp out of the police department lobby, after which they say he groped a cleaning lady. Officers said they later found Bamolem at Rendezvous Center, where they said he had entered 3 separate dorms, each time touching the male and female occupants on the cheeks and upper torso. So the writer says, why was he even allowed back on campus after he broke into a dorm room in what looked a lot like a rape attempt? So the questions being raised here, I think, are interesting and frightening, to be honest with you, and yet I haven't seen a whole lot of coverage about this, at least in area media, at least in state media. 927, well, again, he's a Saudi student, and that means he's a Muslim, and that means in media parlance, he's a member of a protected class, right? 43 at our studios at 927. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. We have a caller with us, and you're on the air. Good morning. Hello.
Good morning. Next time you have a legislature on, could you please ask them for me something concerning the transportation bill? I've heard about the gas tax and the diesel tax and things like this, but what are the plans for electric cars? I have never heard that mentioned. Maybe I've missed it, but I haven't heard it.
Well, I know that there are people who are already talking about charging stations and the like in various places, and probably some people who are trying to sell electric cars in the state. The problem is, of course, especially in western states, you have such long distances and so few charging stations, unless you're just driving around town. And number two, how do we produce the electricity that makes those cars run?
With fuel.
Yeah, we burn oil or coal, right?
Yes, we do.
Okay. All right. Well, I thank you. I think it's a good question. I read the other day where the fellow Elon Musk, who's building the Tesla, is that it? He's building the Tesla, which is an electric car, and apparently a luxury electric car. He believes that government is going to actually outlaw the traditional internal combustion engine in just a few years. I think he might be a little premature, but he believes that we're going to have to find alternatives. So he's working on the driverless car. They're working on other types of way to fuel automobiles. You know, the one thing that we never talk about when we talk about alternative energy, hydrogen. Hydrogen, you could make it in your own bathtub, according to what a friend told me. The hydrogen fuel that you could put in your automobile. People say, well, look what happened to the Hindenburg. Well, the Hindenburg, as it turns out, blew up and exploded because of a chemical reaction with some of the paint in the blimp at the time, way back in the late 1930s, 1938, I believe it was. But I'm told that if someone actually rear-ends you and you're driving a car that is fueled by hydrogen fuel, that the gas tank, well, hydrogen fuel tank, will just break open, and all of that will just then vent up into the air. And yet, it might be the most plentiful element in the universe, and it might be the future of fueling our automobiles. No one's talking about it. Why? Well, we're still making a lot of money off of selling the traditional models. And as long as we're doing that, I guess we're not going to look at something else. And then there was a fellow a few years ago, I saw this on Discovery maybe. He was using a compressed fuel automobile. Except, of course, you have to have some other energy to compress the fuel, which it's just like the electric car. If you're burning coal and oil to generate the electricity, what's the point? 929. Maybe we can just, we'll develop our minds to the point where we can think about transporting ourselves. And, well, that Saudi student, he'd probably already have a market cornered on that, popping up wherever he wants. 9:30, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. Hey, somebody in San Francisco says it's time to outlaw homosexuality. So there is a story out of California, and let's just say it has lefty enraged. They're actually talking about ignoring the law in order to ignore the petition that this man is putting together. I'll tell you a little bit about it in a moment. He does not like what he calls sodomites, and he says it's time to cleanse the planet of them. 9:34, 43 at our studios. Bill Colley with you on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. The other day I saw a posting online, and it was about the major cities around the country that have the highest portions of what they call themselves gay. I mean, that means happy. I think that sometimes when they hear stories like this, they aren't very gay at all. But the percentages are only really anywhere 3 to 4% in a lot of these cities. As it turns out, we keep hearing, it's 10% of the population. Look, a survey in Canada back in the day, maybe 10 years ago, turned up only about 2% of the population. And if you understand, Canada pretty much is like the United States when it comes to culture and the like, that probably our numbers were much lower than 10% as well. But, squeaky wheel gets the grease, maybe not. Maybe we shouldn't use that phrase in talking about this. But anyway, this comes from the Washington Times, Wesley Pruden. First, I want to mention as well, you're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Bill Colley on Top Story. And still, we're holding in at 43. Lots of rain coming through the area today, much of it needed. That may keep temperatures a bit low. The writer says Matt McLaughlin, a lawyer and shade tree theologian, in Huntington Beach, California, paid his $200 filing fee the other day to submit his, quote, Sodomite Suppression Act, unquote, for endorsement by the voters. California has initiative and referendum, and you've had that all the way back into the 1970s. They had a big property tax revolt in the 1970s, you may remember. They took it to the voters, and what was it? Was it Proposition 8? I've forgotten the exact number, but the voters actually upended California's property tax laws at the time. This guy, by the way, says he needs the endorsement by voters. The state attorney general, under the law, may have no choice but to approve a ballot and send it back to its sponsor to see whether he can collect the 365,000 signatures needed to put it on next year's, 2016 it would go to the ballot. Declaring it better, quote, that offenders should die rather than that all of us should be killed by God's just wrath, unquote. Such a law would require that anyone who touches a person of someone of the same gender for gendery gratification to be put to death by, quote, bullets to the head or by any other convenient method, unquote. In the event the act actually becomes law, which is about as likely, Mr. Pruden says, as Barack Obama drawing a red line anywhere and actually enforcing it, the law would send anyone who advocates gay rights for minors off to prison for 10 years and banishes such an advocate from California permanently. In other words, you would be, if you were talking about gay rights for children under 10, you would be expelled from the state. That's what the law says. He goes on to write, Mr. Pruden, the writer at the Washington Times, says, if the state does not act against offenders within a year, private citizens would be then authorized to act as executioners, whether by rope, gun, or portable electric chair. I know a lot of people just drive around with those portable electric chairs in the back of their pickup trucks. He says it perhaps would come with a high-voltage whoopee cushion. The constitutionality of the, quote, Sodomite Suppression Act, unquote, could not be addressed by the state Supreme Court until all gay justices, according to the man who developed this petition, would be purged from the court. In other words, you would only have heterosexuals left who could make the decision about whether the law would stand or not. Now, the state attorney general is being asked to ignore it and asking that it be ignored by people who say it's hateful. But I don't know that you can say that a proposition or a petition drive, just because it's hateful, if the person has actually gone through and they followed all of the legal steps, if you can block it or not. And the writer says the gay caballeros in San Francisco are further unsettled by a new Gallup poll that finds there aren't as many gays in America as they thought, though a visitor from Mars or Venus might conclude that everyone here wears the lavender. But in San Francisco, only 6.2% of the respondents to the poll say they are of the gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgendered persuasion. So this guy's petition might be actually something tongue-in-cheek. I don't think anybody is out there saying, let's go out and shoot, hang, or electrify people of that particular sexual persuasion. But he's doing a great deal to enrage the people of that persuasion by at least even suggesting it. And we don't have an answer yet if he's doing it because he is actually trying to make a point or if he actually believes in this or not. But it would be interesting if such a proposition went to the voters. I doubt like heck it would ever succeed. But the thing is, if they try and block it because they don't like it because it's not politically correct, California may have itself a huge lawsuit on its hands. But at least we're going to be facing some questions. I saw something the other day about California, the efforts, as some of you may have heard, the Roman Catholic Archbishop of San Francisco is being attacked. In fact, the liberals have actually hired a public relations firm to attack him because he says the people who work in his Roman Catholic schools cannot violate the tenets of the faith. Funny how that works. But unfortunately, the general issue with the liberals is they've got to force everyone to believe what they believe. More on this coming up in just a couple of minutes, in fact. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Oh, and there's a bill out in Idaho legislators considering making bullying in schools highly illegal. Like it's never happened before. Oh, that's pleasant. Really not music for a morning show. But we can listen to it for a little while. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I was just mentioning this guy in California who was seeking to eliminate what he calls the sodomites from the state. And I said he could be doing this as a joke. He might have a bigger point he's trying to make, but we don't know. I mean, that hasn't come to the forefront yet. But it has been my experience, and I have been hosting talk radio programs, well, off and on now for 20 years, but it has been my experience that there are people out there of certain persuasions as well as certain beliefs, and it doesn't matter that you don't sit around and mock them and call them names, which I'm not doing. My view is, look, I know what I believe. It works for me. I don't necessarily approve of what you do, but I'm not going to knock your door down, have you dragged away in the middle of the night, and force you to stop. This is America, and we believe in choice. Heck, even Jesus Christ believed in choice. I mean, he told the rich man, he said, all right, you want to join me? Here's what you got to do. The guy said, I can't do that. All right, well, that's it. He didn't say, well, all right, you refuse, huh? I'm going to grab you and I'm going to shake you down and take all of your money and force you to follow me. He didn't do that. However, it seems to me that a lot of these special interest groups, especially whether it comes down to people who enjoy a certain type of sex that the rest of us do not, or people who use certain drugs that the rest of us do not, it's not enough that we don't say, stop right now, and I'm going to drag you away and lock you up because you don't. We don't do that. But they want you to join in. There's that great line, and I've cited it before from the play, later a movie called A Man for All Seasons, where Thomas More, who's being questioned, his inquisitors are asking him about why he will not support them in supporting the Queen's or the King's divorce, and remarriage, and he just doesn't want to answer. And finally, one of them says, "Oh, Thomas, why don't you just sign like the rest of us and come along for fellowship?" And Thomas More responds, "All right, well, tell you what, I'll offer you this. If I sign and I end up going to hell for signing, will you follow me to hell for fellowship?" And one of the guys says, "Are you saying we're going to hell?" He says, "I'm not saying that at all. I'm telling you this is my belief, and if I violate my conscience, I believe that will happen to me." So I don't understand quite why these people think you have to agree with them and sanction what they do, and why you have to go join in the activity, which is what they really want you to do. It's not enough that you ignore them. You have to take part. See, that's what they really want. And I think it's because a lot of them are guilty. They have a guilty conscience, and they figure if I can get someone else involved, they want to take you along, as Thomas More says, to hell with them. Because if you believe it's going to send you to hell, you're not going to go participate. I saw this story today. It reminds me of a similar argument I made online. I wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago about how all of these dope smokers seem to think that, look, I don't sit here and say, hey, if you were smoking marijuana, I want your door kicked down, I want you dragged out, and I want you locked up for the rest of your life. I don't say that. I don't do it. I have no desire to do it. I don't believe it's good for you. And yet I keep hearing from people, wow, Bill, what you need to know, look, why do I have to come over and toke with you in order for you to feel right about doing it? I've already said I don't care. If you want to shoot your toes off, go ahead and do it. I don't care. You know, if you want to be stupid, that's your own business. But I don't need to sanction it. And I keep getting these emails from these people. Some of them get downright nasty. And they tell me, well, marijuana is harmless, Bill. Look, I've seen enough potheads from my own high school days to know that they did not have very good lives following that. But listen to this. Daily Caller reports today, marijuana skyrocketing in potency levels. Researchers are shocked. Why should they be shocked? I mean, people have been genetically experimenting with this for a long, long time. Marijuana is now turbocharged, according to research by a lab authorized by the state of Colorado to test the potency of marijuana. Potency has increased by a factor of 3. Actually, it's more. I'll tell you why in just a minute. This is a much higher level than even the National Institute on Drug Abuse has previously stated. The National Institute on Drug Abuse noted in January 2014, that was a year ago, more than a year ago, that in the 1980s, THC levels were at about 4%. They have gradually climbed up to 15% by 2012. The new findings presented show that the average level of THC in legal Colorado marijuana is about 18.7%, but it can often reach as high as 30%. Lead author Andy LaFrate noted. Now, there's much more to this. And some guy sent me an email the other day, well, alcohol kills brain cells, marijuana doesn't. Well, number one, we haven't done enough research on marijuana yet, even after all these years, because it's not legal. We haven't done enough to really figure out what it does to the brain. It certainly doesn't help the brains of young people who are smoking it. They do know that. They have seen the long-term damage, motor damage that has taken place. And I know a lot of people who have been drinking for a lot of years, some of them in their 80s by now, and they still are walking around talking and acting as... So if they've killed their brain cells, they've killed some that apparently weren't being used because they're still able to function. But here you go. Somebody criticized me when I mentioned the guy who leaped out of a hotel room in Colorado. Well, he had way too much. Well, all right. But look at these new figures. It's all way too much. The Huckabee Report is coming up. It's brought to you exclusively by the financial advisors at Waddell & Reed in Twin Falls, 736-6563. Hope you can stick around. And thank you very much, Governor Huckabee. Coming up on 9:54:43 at our studios, Bill Colley with you on Top Story today on News Radio 1310 KLIX. As well as online, you can hear us anywhere around the world on newsradio1310.com. Speaking of bullying, he was referencing cyberbullying in his report. There is a story on the Associated Press wire today, a bill that would encourage school districts to crack down on bullying in public schools has passed the Idaho House. The plan would also include anti-bullying training for teachers. Because, just teaching how to read and write and that kind of stuff. You got all sorts of time. But some Republicans raised concerns over protections for students falsely accused of bullying and potential litigation. The proposal now goes to the Senate for consideration. All of this bullying talk. Well, there was a story a few years ago about the kid in St. Louis supposedly bullied on Facebook and committed suicide and how awful that was. It may have been that the child wasn't very stable. And of a population of 330 million people, that is possible. That is possible. All I can tell you is, looking back on going to school in the 1960s and 1970s, I was bullied. And sometimes I bullied myself. Well, I didn't. So, look at you. You're disgusting. No, I mean, I bullied other people. And it was pretty common. Everybody got bullied and everybody bullied other people themselves. And some people believe it's actually part, you call it hazing. It's actually part of the human species that we do this as we're growing up. You know, it's a negotiating, how are we going to fit in the world and the like. And there is that old line, sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. No one bothers to even recite that anymore because everything has to be a crisis of mammoth proportions, and we have to involve legislators coming in and saving the day and telling children, no, you can't do that. And that's funny. One of my biggest tormentors when I went off to grade school, kindergarten and the first few years there, I mean, I would cringe when I'd see him coming across the playground. By the time I was in 6th grade, we were such good friends. People would have thought we were conjoined twins. We were everywhere together. We played hockey together. We played football together. We took his dad's golf clubs out when his dad wasn't around and whacked golf balls all over the place. And we were as close as friends could be up until he was killed in 1989 in a car accident. But we figured it out. Yeah, he was a bully for a time, but we figured it out, and eventually we came to an ability to get along, and not only get along, but we became the best of friends. And nobody needed to come in. They didn't have to send a school counselor in or a school teacher in or a policeman in or bring the state legislature in. We just worked it out. Funny how that happens. And most of you out there don't recall any anti-bullying statutes or campaigns while you were in school. And yet, despite all of that, it turned out okay. How did that happen? Doesn't government have bigger things to be worried about than going around trying to referee playground disputes? This is a Republican state for the most part. And you got to admit that when it comes to conservative values and watching money and things like that, they've pretty much done a good job. The governors told us last week, the economy here, when you look at it compared to everywhere else around the country, is doing really well. So why are they bothering to get off into the weeds on issues like bullying? I don't quite understand that one. Rush Limbaugh is coming up, and just somebody's going to write me after the show. My child was bullied, and I guess you think that's okay. Tell your child to grow a tough hide. Coming up on 10 o'clock, news from Fox, followed by Rush Limbaugh. And then following 1 o'clock news, Sean Hannity. Following 4 o'clock news, Glenn Beck, and of course tonight, Dave Ramsey, all ahead. Here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, which means you can hear us anywhere, all around the world online. Just click on that Listen Live icon. God willing and the creek don't rise, I'm back in this very chair tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Hope to see you then.